After several sessions with a psychologist, Thomas began to feel his inner world changing. Although the pain of losing his father did not disappear, he realized that he no longer wanted to live in the shadow of this pain. The psychologist helped him find a new strategy for working with emotions, and Thomas began to feel inner strength. It was difficult and took time, but he felt that he was moving in the right direction. One of the first decisions Thomas made after several sessions with a psychologist was to take up sports. It was not something intuitive or dreamy for him. Sports became for him nothing more than a way to escape from his own thoughts and inner experiences. He did not strive for physical achievements or a desire to improve his body, but was looking for a way to get rid of the negative emotions that had consumed him after the loss of his father. It was a way to channel the anger, pain and uncertainty that Thomas was overwhelmed with. In the early days, sports were foreign to him. He had no experience in training and did not understand how to use the equipment or how to perform the exercises correctly. In the gym, he felt alien, insecure, and even a little shy. Looking at other people who looked like experts in their field, he realized how awkward he looked. Thomas's mind was filled with doubts. This is not for me, this will not help. He constantly thought that it was all in vain. However, despite all this, Thomas continued to go to the gym after school. He started with simple cardio exercises, such as running on the treadmill, stretching, and working with light weights. He did not have a big goal, and did not set himself global goals. He just tried to keep himself moving, distract himself from the pain. The first weeks were difficult. His body was not used to the loads, he often felt tired, but each training day gave him a new dose of hope. Despite the initial difficulties, he began to notice how even in small steps you can make progress. Thomas began to feel how his emotions changed. At first, he did not notice how emotionally he changed during training. But gradually, with each movement, he began to realize that his anger, although it did not disappear, became less acute. He began to concentrate more and more on how his body reacted to the load, to breathing and to the technique of the exercises. At first, sports seemed to him simply a physical activity, but over time he began to perceive it as part of his self-discovery. Thomas noticed how, after training, he felt lightness in his body, even if the pain was still in his heart. It was a process that could not be measured by immediate results. His thoughts and feelings gradually became less chaotic. Sports gave him a sense of control that he lacked in other aspects of his life. He began to notice that sports helped him release tension, instead of accumulating it. With each training session, Thomas began to feel more confident. The initial doubts remained, but they no longer had such strength. He became more confident in his movements, understood how to work with weight, how to increase the load without unnecessary overexertion. His muscles became more toned, his body changed, and with it his inner state changed. At first, Thomas did not notice how his appearance and physical condition began to improve, but then he began to feel it at the level of self-esteem. Thomas began to understand that the changes in his physical condition affected his emotional world. He noticed how his anger and aggression, which had been a part of his life for so long, began to dissipate. He no longer closed himself in, did not try to escape into aggression, because he found a way to give all his energy to sports. Training became his habit, and it helped him restore not only his body, but also his soul. With each training session, Thomas began to trust himself more and more. He was no longer ashamed of his changes, but on the contrary, he began to be proud of the fact that he was able to overcome himself to become better. Physical exercise became for him not only a path to health, but also a way of self-expression, a place where he could release his emotions. At first, he didn't realize how important sports had become to his recovery process, but he gradually realized that it was the first step towards finding peace within himself and no longer losing control of his feelings. After a few months of regular training, Thomas began to notice how his life changed. He was no longer as withdrawn as before. He began to open up to his friends, to interact more with those around him. His relationships with other people also began to improve, because now he could better manage his emotions. Thomas realized that the true meaning of sports for him was not only in physical achievements, but also in psychological transformations. He learned not to avoid pain, but to live with it. Sports helped him restore inner balance, and this process was not only physical, but also a deep emotional recovery. His strength was not in denying the pain, but in finding ways to live with it and, ultimately, turn it into an opportunity for growth. Thomas no longer saw exercise as an escape from pain. He now understood that it was part of his journey, a journey to a new version of himself. And although his pain was still there, it no longer allowed him to define his life. Training became for him not only a physical challenge, but also a path to a deeper self-understanding and inner peace. One of Thomas's greatest achievements was that he no longer closed himself off. At first, after each training session, he would simply go home and try to escape his emotions. But over time, he began to communicate with others, open up to his friends, share his achievements and experiences with them. They began to talk more about training, about how to improve his technique, which exercises to perform for better results. Training together became for them not only a way of physical development, but also a place for emotional expression. Before that, Thomas often felt lonely. He could not find a common language with others because he did not know how to openly talk about his feelings. Communication with his friends seemed superficial to him, and he often felt that they did not understand him. But sport changed that. With each training session, with each laugh after an intense session, he felt more and more in the circle of friends, no longer locked in his shadow. He began to see that emotional support does not always have to be serious and deep. Sometimes it is enough to just be together and share momentary emotions, even if it is just a joke after training. Thomas and his friends began to spend more time together after training. They discussed not only the results of the exercises, but also their personal achievements, the difficulties they faced during training. These conversations became the basis of their friendship. Thomas saw how the support of his friends and the common interest in sports helped him to open up again and start building deeper and more sincere relationships. He realized that it is possible to be open and not be afraid to appear vulnerable. Another important point was that sports gave Thomas the opportunity to feel significant. Every progress he made, every new record or even just an improvement in physical fitness became proof for him that he could control his life, even when he could not change certain circumstances, for example, the loss of his father. This gave him a sense of achievement and helped him develop self-esteem. Training became for him not just a way to relieve stress, but a whole process that he went through together with his friends. Together they supported each other, laughed, overcame difficulties together and achieved better results. In addition to physical training, Thomas began to notice how his attitude towards life in general changed. He became more open to new opportunities, began to interact more actively with others, not being ashamed of his emotions. This was a big step forward, because before he avoided deep conversations, because he was afraid that he would not be able to share his experiences. With each new training session, Thomas began to understand that emotional development and physical progress go hand in hand. His path to recovery became more and more complex. He learned to work not only with his muscles, but also with his own emotions. Sport allowed him to see himself from a different side, to feel his strength and the opportunity to change himself. Over time, Thomas became part of a circle of friends in which he felt accepted and understood. He was no longer the withdrawn guy who avoided socializing. He understood that sports not only improved his physical condition, but also gave him the opportunity to openly express himself, be more sincere and maintain relationships with those close to him. Joint training became a place where he not only worked on his body, but also found new ways to develop emotionally. Thomas began to notice how his anger and aggression became less intense. He did not try to resort to them when something went wrong. He learned to see difficulties as part of the path, not as obstacles. He was no longer afraid to express his feelings, did not run from them. He began to accept his vulnerability, and this became part of his inner strength. Sports, combined with the support of friends and psychotherapy sessions, helped him find balance in life. Relationships with friends became an important source of support for Thomas. They became his support, and this discovery was one of the key moments on the path to recovery. Now he knew that he didn't have to go through the difficulties alone. The friends who were there didn't care how much he lifted in the gym or what his results were. They were happy with his progress, and most importantly, they understood how important it is to be there when you're having a hard time. Training became not only physical exercises, but also moments for the soul. Marta, Thomas's mother, was amazed by the changes that had taken place in her son after several months of seeing a psychologist and playing sports. Until recently, she could not imagine how to get out of this painful state in which he remained after the loss of his father. Thomas seemed withdrawn and alienated, as if everything around him continued to live, while he remained in place, burdened by his pain and anger. Her son constantly avoided conversations, did not give her the opportunity to get closer to him, and every gesture of support she made pushed him away even more. But now everything had changed. She noticed how he began to open up more. Before her eyes, he seemed to blossom. At first it was insignificant, a few jokes after training, light conversations over dinner, but with each passing week, Thomas began to allow himself to be sincere more and more. He no longer hid his emotions, and although the pain was still there, he began to find ways to manage it. Marta was surprised to see her son open up not only to her but also to his friends. Her heart was filled with pride and pain at the same time, because she realized how much time she had missed when she could not help him earlier. She saw how his relationships with others had changed, how he had begun to find a balance between self-knowledge and communication. Thomas no longer felt the need to withdraw into himself, did not run away from emotions, and even began to laugh. He was no longer the broken teenager he had been a few months earlier. Marta noticed changes not only in his behavior, but also in his appearance. He became more physically active, his muscles began to take shape, and he looked much healthier. Thomas not only started exercising, but he also looked more energetic and confident. Her son was no longer under the pressure of his pain. She understood that although there was still a lot of work ahead, this was already a big step. Marta realized that this recovery process was not only about changing her son's behavior, but also about changing her own understanding of how to help him. She no longer tried to force her help on him, but gave him space. She didn't ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. She was simply there, ready to support him on his journey. With each passing day, she realized more and more that the key was not to try to change him, but to help him change at his own pace. She felt that her son no longer needed help just to survive, he was starting to build his life as it was, with all its emotions and difficulties. And although there was still some pain that remained with him, she saw Thomas beginning to find his way back to himself, and that gave her hope.
And tell me if you have had similar situations, write in the comments.